I'm just gonna freaking do it at some point. And like, what's the worst that can happen? What the worst that can happen used to be we would die. And generally our mind will tell us it's worse than it actually is.
I'm gonna make him suffer.
And make me suffer.
Hello and welcome to The Secret of My Success, the podcast where we explore what it means to live a fulfilling life. I am your host, Erin Curran. If you have not already, please like and subscribe. We really appreciate the support. In today's episode, I am speaking with Jason Frazell. Jason is an executive coach, facilitator, and trainer specializing in working with leaders and teams to enhance performance and growth. In addition to working as a coach, Jason is a fellow podcaster and he hosts his long-running show, Talking to Cool People, where he has compelling conversations with change makers and perspective shifters. When he isn't working, you'll find Jason playing guitar, looking for the next concert to attend, or building Legos with his kids. Enjoy the episode. So today I have Jason Frazell on. Jason, thank you so much for joining us.
Aaron, it's so great to be here. We've known each other for a few years now, and I'm really excited for this conversation because I don't think we've had a conversation quite like this before.
No, we haven't, because last time we connected, you were actually my coach. And we talked a lot about what many of the people who listen to my podcasts know of me. There's sort of a prequel kind of a conversation that you know a lot of the juicy bits for. And
Yeah.
I thought it was high time for us to connect and for me to have you on here for us to have a next level conversation.
And Aaron, also I have to say for the audience, you're grinning because you get to ask me a bunch of questions that I am going to answer. That is going to be a little bit of a different perspective for you. You've probably been noodling on how can I make this just a bit uncomfortable, and I cannot wait.
I'm going to make him suffer.
And make me suffer.
Well, you are fortunate because I have been down with whatever the latest variant is for about 10 days, and so I'm still a little foggy.
Okay.
Not on my A game, but that's okay.
You're not on your A game as most people's A game, so I think we're fine.
Thank you. I appreciate
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
Cool. So where I normally start with my guests is for them to get our audience related to either an event or a part of your story where you had a major shift in context and,
hmm
how that came about. So where would you like to start?
Yeah. The place that immediately comes to mind for me is moving from the great state of Minnesota, which is where I wasn't born, but for all intents and purposes, I was, and I spent the first 27 years of my life. I went to all through school. I went to the University of Minnesota, and then bought a townhome and worked in Minnesota. I was close to home. And at some point, I felt a calling to do something different. I didn't really know why. And I moved to New York City. And and the reason I bring this is one of the key things in my life is because everybody that I knew said, "What are you doing? Why would you do that? Do you know how expensive it is? Do you know how hard it is to find an apartment?" And it was just me at the time. I was single. And I did it anyway. And I was scared because I was going to be paying more for a crappy apartment than I was paying for a mortgage on a townhouse in the Twin Cities. And I was moving into a business environment that was much more East Coast, upper, like Northeast focused. Not that Minnesota doesn't have a lot of serious business people, because they do, but the culture is a little bit more friendly and nice. And out here in the East Coast, generally, you kind of get to business. And I was scared that I was going to be seen as too young, not reputable enough, didn't have a level of expertise, didn't know what I was doing. And I did it anyway. And I say this as the original shift is the context that I was able to shift for myself was I can do anything I set my mind to, even if it feels really uncomfortable. And I say that, Aaron, is because up until that point, my life was all about comfortable, making it easy. It's easy to go to the state school. It's easy to live where you know your friends from high school and all these things. And I think it's very cliched, but it's the Robert Frost poem, "The Path Less Traveled." I think at that point, the path more traveled for most people like myself at that point was to stay doing what I was doing. And I decided to try something different. And that built a lot of confidence. And I didn't know the language at the time, but shifted my context, which is it's a language we now share from our training, but I didn't have any idea what that meant at the time.
Right. Yeah. Another way to say that is like a paradigm shift or
Yeah.
changing your point of view, really.
Yeah.
It's I often forget because you have such a New York vibe that you were from Minnesota, and I lived in
Thank
Minnesota
you.
for 4.5 years.
I know you did. Yeah. It's amazing.
And being a Florida girl who moved to Minnesota just because of a hurricane, Minnesota is a culture shock. You were in the Twin Cities,
I
which
was.
they're pretty up on things compared
Yeah.
to the rest of the state.
Yes. I think
I
that's
was in
fair.
Mankato, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, like, people from Minnesota generally stay in Minnesota forever unless they
Mhm.
are really just the tall poppy and they need to go someplace else because they just don't fit.
That's, and Aaron, what you said, I had that internally of like a fish out of water. It wasn't that I was a fish out of water because I can hang. And I go back, my parents still live there and I have friends there. I can hang, but for me, I felt like it was something more. And I say that not from there's anything wrong with any of it. If I would have stayed there, I'm sure my life would have been great too. But I just had this internal calling. We're going to talk about kind of our journeys today. One of the lessons is to trust when there's something calling to you.
Mm,
And that for me, it was actually a location, which was like in the vibe of New York City. But for everybody listening, you can have callings for all sorts of things. It doesn't have to be geography. It could be romantic, professional, friendships, whatever it may be. And that was just a really powerful thing for me to actually go out and pursue because I didn't. And one thing I didn't mention is I didn't do it the year before because I was too scared. So I
mm,
didn't take action. And the next year I did. So that was another part of my shift is like, what would I need? And I decided I just needed to do it because I was like, there's nobody's going to make me feel better about this.
yeah. Yeah. And that's I think a very important point because we think that easy is how life is supposed to be. We have this. I think it's almost something that's been in us from forever. If
Yeah,
we're on edge, we're like, because of like the whole, there's the idea that our brains haven't really caught up with the way our society runs. Like,
absolutely.
you feel on edge, it's a saber-toothed tiger, and then you go back to the cave and you feel comfortable, and the brain and the body settle down, and you go back into homeostasis, and everything is good. But in our environment nowadays, it's like we can't find that comfortable spot. We're
That's
being
right.
challenged on so many fronts, and I think we that easy comfortable idea is so captivating.
Yeah.
So, what had you get more confident in the move that helped you overcome that idea of comfort and ease?
Yeah. There was a couple of external factors that definitely made it more comfortable for me that I'll share. One, I was able to transfer with my job. So I was able to land doing the same job, working for the same person. I was in sales engineering at the time, so I supported like enterprise accounts. So I knew what I was doing. I didn't know the people I was going to be working with. So that was good. And then more importantly, was my paycheck followed me. So I had a paycheck when I landed, which I was prepared to go without it because it wasn't a sure thing they could transfer. But that was definitely a good landing. I also had one of my best friends who lived there with her boyfriend. So I had instant community. And those are the external things. The internal things for me was just realizing how resourceful I am about like the unknowns are all figure outable and my general context is if somebody else has figured it out, I can certainly do the same. And things like moving to a different city, eh, you know, millions of people who've done that in New York City. If they can do it, I can do it. Is kind of how I generally look at it from a that's all the belief in myself, like, hey, if I don't know, I can ask. I'm not afraid to ask for help. And actually go out and do that. And then all I had left was the feelings of, hey, this is scary, but it's also exciting.
Mm.
And I remember when I found out that they were going to transfer me, I had less than 2 months between finding out, yes, you're going, to actually needing to be there for some business reasons. And that was interesting because I proved to myself that I was able to do it. I actually did it pretty well, minus some moving challenges, but they were related to the movers, not to me. But otherwise, I did it, and that was again, like I said, that was a huge confidence booster. Like, oh, I'm sitting in my apartment in New York City now, working in this new role with new people, and it's actually going well. So some of the external factors that were able to help me to feel confident, but then also like the mindset around it as well. And I'm also somebody, talk about East Coast energy. I'm just gonna freaking do it at some point, and like, what's the worst that can happen? And I like what you said about the idea of survival and how what the worst that can happen used to be we would die. If I go out and I hunt and I get caught or I fall off a cliff or whatever the dangers are, I literally am not here and then I can't provide for my family. You can't continue to progress humanity. What's the worst that can happen is I can always move back. And that's a thing I ask clients a lot too, is what's the worst thing that can happen? And generally our mind will tell us it's worse than it actually is, factually.
This is the truth. Absolutely.
I know, and I know you've lived through this of like, oh, what's the worst that can happen? You're like, it's not nearly as bad as our brain will tell us that it is.
Right. So, you had said earlier about trusting the call, right?
Yeah.
That little niggling. The name of my enterprise, my business enterprise, is the Unmistakable Entrepreneur because it
Hmm.
speaks to that voice that we hear, the one that won't fucking go away.
Yeah.
It's just there. You can ignore it all you want to. You can keep circling around the mountain on the same path, but it's still going to be that same sign telling you to go up to the next level, right?
Yeah.
Did you have some kind of support? Were you in personal development? Were your parents super supportive? Like, you took some action to be able to plan and prepare, and I can hear that with the job, and you also were prepared to do it fully on your own.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like there was a confluence of events that
Hmm.
helped to get you there.
Yeah.
But what was it that you were turning to support you through the maybe less than certain aspects of the journey?
Yeah. You were at, I'll answer the first thing around, was I doing any personal and professional development or personal development? No, I don't even know what that meant. I,
Oh.
and I was 27 at the time, it was 20 years ago, 2005. I wouldn't even know it if somebody said, "Hey, what are you doing for personal development?" I go to the gym. Like, I don't even know what that means. Like most people that you and I in the space we live in now, that's most people's journey is like somebody they're like, "Oh, there's a thing I can do that isn't just more of the same or having drinks with friends and talking through stuff." So the answer was no there. The answer to the parents is absolutely. I grew up in a very supportive home. My parents are very independent and they fully supported me. Of course, they had some feelings about it, but I was never discouraged to do it. And they also knew from knowing me from the day I came out that you can't really tell me not to do it because that's not really going to matter what you tell me, especially when I'm an adult and you actually can't control it. I'm going to do what I feel like doing. Looking back, Aaron, I've never really reflected on this. What's interesting, what's coming up for me is what I think I also did is I just ignored that I felt crappy sometimes, which I think is something that you learn in sales and is a really valuable skill and something that I've actually learned to not do as much and like feel the feels and actually relate to that as the feelings as being okay. One of the things in the way I was raised, and it's not really my family, it's more just culturally, the Midwest, Minnesota specifically, is very, I don't have any feelings, I don't have any needs, but all of you are going to get as much as you need from me. And so I
Mhm.
never learned a lot about how to relate to how I was feeling as useful. And then you go into sales and you lose a deal. It's not useful to sit and mope about that. What's useful is to get up and go find the next deal.
Hmm.
So I really appreciate this question that you asked me because I've never reflected on what it was. So parents, yes. Having the external factors, yes. And then I'm just also somebody, I've never been somebody who's been really totally willing to be stopped by the fear because I've always believed in the word that you and I use probably a lot now. I didn't know it was like possibility. I think when I say like, what are my options or how could this be great? Now it's like, oh, what is the possibility of this? That was always running in my mind. I didn't know it at the time that that's how I would say it though.
Hmm.
That general positive personality, and it goes back to how I was raised. Is I was not raised in anything as possible home. We did not grow up wealthy by any stretch of the imagination, but definitely raised as a hey, with hard work and being true to yourself, you can go and do things.
Hmm. I also find it's always fascinated me that many personal development programs were cultivated inside of some sort of a sales training structure.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you're familiar with Gratitude and Landmark.
Hmm.
Um, at the introduction to Gratitude training, which is a smaller version of Landmark, they're cut from the same cloth.
Yeah.
Gratitude goes very deeply into the history of how their training programs were created,
Yeah.
and it started with an MLM.
Of course.
And what they do is the really successful salespeople try to share what makes them so successful. And I find that like people who do sales are just they're a different kind of creature because it's like there is no fear. Like you eat what you kill.
Yeah.
And if you don't kill, you don't eat.
Yeah.
And like many companies have tried creating some sort of a structure to have the salesperson feel more comfortable so they can be relaxed and clear to sell, and that actually disincentivizes anybody on the sales staff because you're not willing to fight the dragon if
No,
if your meal isn't dependent on it.
that's right. Yeah. Absolutely. There. I love to say to anybody that'll listen that everybody should work in sales for a year. Selling something, doesn't matter what it is. There are some very valuable lessons in not taking it personally. Sometimes it is personal in sales. Sometimes it's personal in when, the kind of businesses you and I run. Sometimes it is personal. A lot of times it's not. And also that you just have to keep moving. You just have to keep moving. You do need to get back up and go for the next thing. Or you say the extreme version is you don't eat slash you get fired. The less extreme version of that is you're just setting yourself behind and then you're playing catch up. And then you're in that, what we call it, needy energy, which nobody likes to buy from a needy salesperson. I know I don't.
This is true. This is very
Yeah.
true.
And I know
But
the kind of work you used to do, you probably had people selling to you. And you like I'm guessing in like what you did at some point in your career, you would have folks that would want to sell you things based on your business career and like that energy isn't great.
always,
Yeah.
and it's funny because when I'm on the selling end, like, building a coaching practice and talking to
Hmm.
people about my offering and the podcast and this, it's like I have a I don't want to be a bother kind of a context. But when a salesperson called the office as the controller, I have absolutely no problem cutting them off at the knees. If you start out the conversation with lies, I'm a no.
Not a
Like,
great place to start. No.
oh yeah, me and your boss go way back. Really, how far back? What college? What this? What like? I'm gonna
Yeah.
ask the questions.
Yeah.
I am gonna like tear you apart. But like for me, it feels like being on that end of sales, it's more like a defensive, protective kind of a space. And that's more my vibe. It's more of a I'm gonna make sure that everything is okay and everything is safe and everything is square. Like in the accounting realm, that's kind of what we do. We make sure that the numbers
Sure.
are there so that everybody gets their paycheck at the end of the week.
Yeah.
And so, I wish I had paid as much attention to that because I would make sure that I knew enough about whatever it is you're trying to sell me that I know whether you're trying to screw me or not.
It's
And some
smart.
people really appreciated that, and some people really didn't like it very much.
You're like, wait, these tactics that worked on the last prospect aren't working here. This doesn't feel good.
I hated buying cars, and they
Yeah.
hated me because I'd be sitting there running the numbers on, on a little piece of paper with the interest rates and everything else, and they're like, "How do you get that?" And I'm like, "Well, this is what the numbers are, and so you're
Yeah.
telling me that my payment's going to be blah blah blah, but so what?"
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
When we talk about this idea of being called toward something, there is a certain amount that you want to know about what you're doing and about where you're going. You don't want to just jump off of a cliff completely unaware. But at the same time, there's this idea of surrender and not needing to
Mm.
know, because one of the things I think that struck me most in the last several years as I was going through, I don't even remember which course, it is this idea that if what you're going for is a true transformation, then how the hell do you know what it looks like on the other side?
You don't. Yeah, exactly.
And if you don't know what it looks like on the other side, then how can you be trying to control all the levers and switches?
Brilliant. Yeah, that's brilliant, Aaron. I love that. Yeah, I mean that's my experience as well. As somebody, through the way that we met people and leading that program is people come in and they say, I want these things. And sometimes they're very tangible, outcome based things, which is great. And sometimes they're more, I want to have a feeling, and they're more qualitative, more feeling based. I can tell you, I've helped graduate, including you, say like over 40 folks, including graduating myself. Nobody at the end of that program, and it's probably, I know you've done some other programs, it's probably the same in these other programs. Nobody gets exactly what they expect. It's usually something different, but more powerful than the thing they wanted. And
Yeah.
and usually my experience is people will get what they said they're going to get in addition to these things. But you're right. How would you possibly know? And I say this, and I know you and I share some disdain for a lot of the programs and things that are out in the space. We could do a whole podcast on that with my friend Lauren. She's brilliant at making fun of some of these seven figure, accelerate to seven figures in 90 days. I'm like, really? That's interesting. Seven figures, huh? But like some of these things were like, at the end of this, you're going to have these things. I'm like, how do you know that? Just like if you go to university, oh, at the end of your college degree, you're going to know all these things. How would you know that? Not necessarily. I may take the test and forget every single thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I know you and we share some, what's the word? Not pessimism, but some cynicism around some of the things out there.
A healthy skepticism.
Helping is, yeah, that's a little more
Healthy
positive. Helping is
skepticism.
skepticism. Yeah.
That's, part of the reason why I practice Nichiren Buddhism is because I walked into one of the first meetings and they were like, ask anything. If we don't know the answer, we'll tell you we don't know and we'll find somebody who does. And, like we want you to ask and we want you to understand. And the minute Buddhism is proven wrong, Buddhism will change. And it's
Yeah.
like, wait,
That's
wait,
brilliant.
wait a minute, hold on. But, nobody can prove Buddhism wrong.
Right.
And it's like, because like when my experience is when I walk into something so completely open to be able to express myself fully and to experience what somebody else has to express, it's only going to help me become greater.
Hmm.
um when I was in Minnesota, I was married to a Catholic, the youngest of 13. um the whole family except for one sister was Catholic. That one sister had converted to Baptist.
Mm.
And I remember she and her husband and I would sit off to the side and have conversations about religion and philosophy that nobody else could engage in,
Yeah.
because almost everybody there was a Catholic because that's what they were told they were,
Right.
as opposed to actually really understanding what that meant and exploring how it fit for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to make a comment about that. I've had this conversation. I grew up in a Lutheran home,
Mm.
Minnesota. There's a lot of Lutherans in Minnesota because that's Scandinavian roots. And what you just described for most people, it's just a heck of a lot easier as a human to go that way, including for myself. And I don't relate to any of that as wrong. I know a lot of people who grew up in various types of Christian religion specifically, and it's just easier to have people tell us what to do and how to think. And you see in society and throughout history that works. It works
Yeah.
to tell people what you should think about the government, about these different ideas, because it's hard work to inquire. And I know there's points in my life I don't want to inquire. I want you to tell me because I'm raising a family or I'm growing a business or I'm like, you just moved, like I'm moving. Like I don't want to have to spend the mental energy to inquire about these things. Just tell me what the heck's going on.
Hmm.
And and religion is a tricky one because it, there's always more to inquire and learn. And if people like it, because it's faith based, if they believe that in their heart of hearts that that is the thing that's good for them, then I say, great.
Yeah.
But you see this all the time where people have their inquiries or they either have a negative experience or they just feel that calling around their belief system and go, oh, like what else might be out there, that curiosity. And if you don't have it, that's great too.
Hmm.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I was thinking about the heretics at the different table. You know, literally the
Yeah.
table of non-Catholics. You're like, there's the Protestants over there, and like, oh my gosh.
No, I was the one that always got the kids in trouble in the back of the church. It's
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah,
making fun of the Catholic aerobics, stand up, sit
yeah,
down, kneel. So yeah,
yeah. It's good for
no,
you. Good for your quads.
it truly is. Um, and I think what you point to is beautiful. Not everybody is meant to be on the leading, bleeding edge of the world. And it's really, I personally find that it's really easy to forget that the people who engage in inquiry are actually special and unique. It really takes something to be, what is it they call that, the early adopters.
Early adopter. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never thought of myself as an early adopter, like as far as tech or any of that is concerned. Make sure you work out the
Hmm.
bugs before it gets to me. I don't want to be bothered. But
Yeah.
there are certain topics where I just can't let go.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep digging, I'm going to keep asking, and I don't mind if you really firmly believe that you believe what you believe, then you won't have a problem having a conversation with me about it.
Yeah. The thing there too is being an early adopter in anything isn't right or wrong. It's not better or worse. It's just it's to me that's an internal thing. It's funny you related. I am a technology early adopter, so I'll work out bugs for you. I've worked out lots of bugs that you probably don't have to use now, including what we're recording on today. But the idea that, and you see this a lot in the space, personal development space, is if you're not doing these certain things or inquiring or operating a certain way, then you're not living out your full potential. And maybe I think there's always more for us, but at the same time, I'm sure you've been on the receiving end of it. I know that I certainly have some of the like the guilty marketing of like, oh, you haven't aspired to this thing, and if you haven't aspired to this thing, then you're letting the world down, and the people are like I hate that stuff so much because it,
Yeah.
and yeah, you got to come to your own decision around it. And sometimes it's purely from a place of shit ain't working. I need something different. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's from a place of what is my next level and everything in between. And it's all great for me, relating back to my story of moving, it was kind of working, but I wasn't really feeling fulfilled where I lived. I just had a calling. So it wasn't that there's anything, what we'd say is wrong. I could have done that, but I just felt for me, there was something, I don't even say more, just different. And that, kind of to wrap that narrative, I have wonderful two children, a wonderful wife. We've been married for 16 years now. We have a life bigger than I ever could have imagined. And I think to myself a lot, what would have, what would have happened to me if, where would I be now if I wouldn't have made that move? Wouldn't know my wife because she was here. Wouldn't have children. We wouldn't live in New York. All these things. So it's amazing to think about the nothing but positives other than paying more in taxes. That's in the state of New York. More expensive cost of living, but the positive thing by trusting that calling.
Yeah. And Well, let me ask, do you think that makes it harder if there's nothing wrong and you're making such a massive change? Does it make it more difficult to make the jump?
I do because I don't know the science behind this, but the rudimentary way of saying is the carrot and the stick motivations. I
Mm,
think people, without knowing the actual the science behind this, most people I know are more motivated by the alleviation of pain. I know I am a lot. Like, oh, what's the thing that's gonna make, and you said it, make it feel easy, make it feel comfortable. And I know you've done a lot of studying on neuroscience. So have I, like 95% of what we do in our brains all day, we don't know about. So that operating system of the human brain, which is I think 99% of the operating system of your cat or your dog, is what's the thing I can do to make my life as easy as possible? What's the decision? What's the program? What's the money spent or not spent? Do I go on that date? Do I not? Like the thing that keeps you safe. And sometimes the thing that is but I do believe there has to be a level of discomfort that you get to, and then you also go, how it's going now isn't likely going to alleviate it.
mm,
So I'll give a real life example from coaching that you and I have both experienced in our coaching work is when people want to get promoted. So you probably coach people on getting promoted. I know you've been promoted yourself, and like most of us have been promoted throughout our career. Is the pain of getting that performance review where you think you're ready to be promoted and it says you're not quite ready yet. When you get that and you want to get promoted, not just for the money, but for the recognition, the ego, all the you maybe you want to have a wider impact, you will do almost anything inside of in the market in corporate America to get promoted. Like what the usually the conversation is, what do you need to see from me? What do I need to do to get to this next level? And the pain, the outward pain is they'll say, well, I believe I deserve it because I'm ready to advance my career. The internal pain is I'm not worthy, I'm never going to get to where I want to be, and all the self-esteem type of things. Very common coaching conversation. And once that pain gets to a certain point, people will do almost anything. They'll hire a coach, they'll go to their boss and have a hard conversation. But until that point, they may not do any of that.
mm.
And I'm sure you've probably seen this before. Or maybe you've been this before. I have been this person before. You ask about personal development, like, what? When I was 27, I'm like, I don't know. It's working.
Well, and I think that also brings up an interesting point because, there's this idea that each of us is able to bear a different level of pain. Some people, like, it's just a very low bar, and other
Yeah.
people are able to endure all sorts of abuse just
Yep.
because they're hoping. And so that's an interesting it's an
Yeah.
interesting idea that you're pointing to because,
Yeah.
like, if you are somebody who has a weaker constitution, who really can't handle that much pain, or just kind of go, oh, one of my favorites, well, it just must not be meant to be. I used to
Right.
play that game a lot with myself, but I've been listening to a
Sure.
lot of Joe Dispenza, and he talks
Yeah.
about when you're crossing the river, all of those little voices in your head are going to be telling you to go back the other way, and it's going to
Absolutely.
feel like it makes sense. They're going to use the excuse that this must not be right because it doesn't feel okay. Like, how many times, especially coaching clients, like, how many times do people sell themselves out when really what's just a few more feet would be exactly beyond their wildest dreams? How do you convince them to go that little extra bit?
Yeah. That's brilliant. The other thing to acknowledge here too is sometimes a lot of the a lot of the hesitation or reasons people don't do it is therapeutic. They were told they're not allowed to take risks as a child, or they saw, yeah, I mean, you look at historically, you look at, and I'll just relate this to my family of origin story. My great grandparents were salted the earth Dust Bowl farmers in Kansas.
Mm,
They were not thinking about personal development. They were thinking about how do we feed the kids tonight? Do we have the money to pay the utility bill? And literally in survival mode. and they came out of, it came out of the Great Depression, and that's why you see that generation. A lot of it is really related to around a bit more comfort, but a bit more survivability. When you saw retirement start, more people thinking about retirement and owning houses and such, and and acknowledging all that. That for some of us, the reason we don't take risks is because we were either told not to or we did, and it hurt really, really badly, and that's imprinted into our brain. You're an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm sure there's been a few times when you've been hurt pretty badly, where like you thought there was that client who was going to work with you, or you had a big proposal on the table, or you, let's give a real life example. And I'm not saying this happened to either of us. You put up a podcast and nobody listens to it. That does not feel good. That does
No.
not happen to you or I know that, Aaron, but those sort of things don't feel good. Or in the kind of work we do, you have a client who tells you all the right things and they don't do shit. And they go, yeah, I think we're going to wrap up our coaching. And they can't own that. That hurts because, like, to your point, I know you and I are similar in this. We see possibility in people and doing and like moving things forward. And again, I just say all this to acknowledge that this is all not as simple as, oh, you just gotta, it's like, oh, you just gotta go do it. And I love Mel Robbins. I think she's great, but her whole thing is like, you just gotta go do it. I'm like, yeah, not everybody's equipped to do that. Not everybody's equipped to do that.
And I think,
Having
like,
them do it, yeah. Yeah.
early Gary Vee was a lot that way. You got to just
Yes,
go
he
do it.
was. Just
But
go
then
do it.
he evolved beyond that. I was really surprised because when he first came out, I adored him, his
Yeah.
energy. But after a little while, because like the whole trauma and the walls and all of the shit that I had built up in my life, I couldn't do what he was telling me to do. And so I wrote him
Right.
off.
Yeah.
I circled back a couple of years later, stumbled across one of his videos, and he had shifted
Hmm.
a little bit. And he was saying, if all you want is $60,000 a year, you can generate $60,000 a year swapping He-Man cards or,
Absolutely.
like whatever it is. And it was beautiful to see somebody who, because I don't think Grant Cardone would ever do that.
It's funny you bring up Grant Cardone. I saw something last week. Somebody was ripping him a new one because he said something about if you're a dad and you make less than 400,000, you should be ashamed of yourself.
That's insane.
It's total, and 99.9% of the people on the planet hear that and they go, "That's ridiculous." But that speaks to that speaks to his people.
Well, and that's fantastic
Yeah,
because, like, like I shared with you, like, when you have a podcast, everybody wants to be on it, right?
yeah,
Everybody wants to be on it, and everybody thinks that they're the perfect fit. Many people aren't really checking to see if they're really a perfect fit. They just want exposure. And so they think if you put a camera in front of their face, that like it's going to be instant, overnight, viral, whatever. And
amazing.
having conversations with certain people who they're so out of touch with like the give and the take and who their audience really is and whether the podcast is a fit. Grant Cardone is unabashedly, unashamedly who he is.
Absolutely.
And I would never buy one of his programs because I am not his target.
Neither would I, and I get
Eh,
it. I understand why people do.
yeah. And I think it's beautiful that you bring that up because I didn't bring him up to shame him in any way. And it's something I think that needs to be said out loud because as we have these conversations, you and I, or anybody else that's on my podcast, we're in a particular level of the conversation for people who are engaging in a certain kind of an inquiry in their lives.
Yeah,
And for this to be useful for the kind of people that resonate with me, they've got to be the people who maybe their confidence isn't that great, or, maybe they have a calling and they're not really sure how to ground in and figure out, like, am I lying to myself? Am I trying to keep myself small? Or am I trying to block myself from a really amazing opportunity? Like, which end of the spectrum is it? And how do you know? And I think that it's super important to recognize for the people who are listening to this podcast right now, there may be somebody that you see the videos for and you cringe every time. Or
Yeah,
there may be somebody that you see and you go, oh my gosh, I wish I could be like him or her. That's fantastic. Don't look at it as a negative. It's not a put down for who you are and how you exist. It's either something for you to aspire to or something for you to acknowledge that you're not a fit for.
absolutely. Yeah, I'll share with the audience. I've been fortunate over the last, going on 6 years now. I've coached some people that I'm pretty blown away by in terms of the level of they've gotten to in their career, or what they've done. I've also had a chance to do some work with some folks that they're like famous in the personal development space.
Mm,
These people are all really normal. I mean, they've done some impressive things, but they'll be the first to tell you they're not special generally. They, and I always like to share this story, is it blew my mind. I had this new client, and we were getting to know each other. He came from a coaching platform, so he selected me, and then we just got to know each other. So I didn't know much about him. And on our first call, so no, so tell me what you do. He goes, well, I run a manufacturing facility. I have 1,500 employees. 15. I said 1,500. Okay. And they were a big manufacturer for the auto parts industry. And he said to me, and I'll never forget this, Aaron. He said, what? And I said, what should I know about you? He goes, I walk into my office every day, single day, and think that today is the day that all these people are going to figure out that I'm a complete fraud. I said, I said, how do you cope with that? He goes, I don't. I'm, I'm not in a good place. He said today, and we have new leadership coming in, and I'm scared they're going to call me to the carpet. And the reason why is he grew up in that business working from the line. Does not have a college degree. He was good on the line. He's 30 years in this, site doing that. And I can point at most people at any level that I worked at, including people that run big teams, and they'll tell you something similar to that. And I say all that for encouragement. I partially say this to make myself feel better when I have these feelings, but also everybody is figuring it out all of the time. And Grant Cardone is figuring it out, and Tony Robbins is figuring it out. And I'd say it because like this whole culture of these elite people you want to be, well, I don't know all of them, but I do know a few of them. I'm sure if you had this experience too through all the things you've done, you're like, these people are just people, and they've right place, right time, skills. They're good at controlling their attitude and being good humans and putting out good energy in the world, but they
mm,
also don't know what the heck they're doing half the time,
yeah,
or 90% of the time. You're like, I know what I'm doing about 10% of the time. The other 90%, I ask my trusted team, or I work with my coach, or I talk to my wife or my husband. And then I trust, and then at the end of the day, all they're left with is, and then I trust myself to figure it
yeah.
out.
There's that word trust. It's huge.
Trust. It is.
It really is huge because without trust, there but for the grace of whoever,
Yeah.
if I don't um if I don't believe that I have the capacity, then like why would I try to go there? It's just
Yeah.
it's not going to be a thing. And one of my favorite quotes from Einstein is, well, it's not really a quote. One of the ideas, a question that he asks is like, do you believe the universe is a friendly place? Once you
Mm,
decide whether you believe that the universe is friendly or not, then everything else falls in line behind that.
yeah. Oh, yeah, I love that. I could I share one more thing uh, uh, that's inside of this topic?
Sure.
I have another client who she her ideal thing is to get guidance and mentorship from people that have been there and done that.
Mm,
I like that too, but that's kind of her guidepost is I want people really Aaron, to tell me what to do because they've been there and done that. And through working with her, that's great. I agree. I think we all need that. I know you have a financial background. There are some things you need mentorship in, like straight up, like here's how you do things.
yeah.
But a lot of what she wants to work on aren't like how to do things. They're more how to feel or how to be. And what we came to uncover is there was actually a trap because she continuously would look. to outside guidance. And I know that I've done this. I know that you have as well. And then you try the things that you're told to do. And then you don't get the same results, or it actually doesn't, it's not a positive result. And all it does is reinforce that you're a piece of crap. Because, well,
Exactly.
because if Erin has this program and she tells me if I do these 25 things, I'm going to generate 50 clients, and I literally put my head down to do the 50 things and the 50 clients don't come, that means there's something wrong with me because Erin did it.
Yeah.
And again, just encouragement for the audience is, yeah, how to's and tactical things. There's a lot of that you need and to identify, and a lot more of what we know is really truly internal, and it's our attitude, our energy, how we think about it. And back to what you said, in trusting in ourselves. And you don't have to feel like you trust yourself to actually trust yourself. That's the big one.
Yeah. And actually, even, a little while ago, you mentioned the word trap, I think, with relation to this particular coaching client. The trap is our brain keeps track of all of those little promises we have ever made to ourselves. We know how many
Mm-hmm.
times we've fallen down. We know how many times we've screwed the pooch. We know exactly how many times we did or did not do the thing that we said that we would or wouldn't do.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've got this battery of evidence to prove that we are a horrible human being and don't deserve.
Totally.
And that isn't going to go away easily. You have to actually build the muscle the other way. And so there's, the idea of the feeding the white wolf or the dark wolf.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody had actually shifted that a little bit one time and was talking about two pools instead. And if you're filling one pool, the light pool or the dark pool, it's not a question of which one survives or succeeds. It's you could be incrementally feeding one more than the other and feel like you're perfectly balanced, but one of them is going to win out over time.
Yeah,
And so even if I'm only winning 51% of the time and I'm losing 49% of the time, it's still a net gain. It may still
absolutely.
feel like shit, and it may take me a lot longer to get where I want to go. But if I've got no way to review or to reinforce or to question that, which is where coaching becomes invaluable. If there's nobody that I can talk to, or if everybody that I talk to is just like, oh my God, Erin, you shouldn't feel that way. You are so amazing and I
Oh, the
believe in
best.
you. And I'm going,
So
fuck
not useful.
you. like,
So not useful sometimes.
and like, I'm like, I don't want to hear the rah-rah stories. I want to
Yeah.
hear how you failed. You're puking in a bucket. You like, it was the worst experience of your life. And this is how you managed to get through it. Like, I want to hear the dirty, grubby, nasty, grimy story because if you tell me you're successful coming out of the womb, I'm going to go bullshit.
Aaron, you mean you don't want to talk to somebody like, let's take like a coach or a therapist. They're like, yeah, I got my coaching certification. Then I had 25 clients lined up at my door. They're literally ready to book sessions with me. I had a conversation with somebody I used to work with in sales. She's now a therapist, and we were talking about her building her practice, and she's great. She's really good at what she does. She has a great degree. She's like, and it's hard to find clients because she doesn't take insurance, and she's going through the same process, and we talked about this, how for her it's a mental game. She's like, I know I'm good, and yet not everybody's going to hire me, because when you come from a sales background or a finance background, like, here's how you're going to do it. And we're talking about, like, coaches and therapists and people who have extra training in these mental models, who it still doesn't always feel good. And so you imagine people that go out and try and build businesses that have none of this support,
Yeah.
and they get no's. They've never done sales. And, it's like 85% of all small businesses fail within the first 5 years in the United States or something like that. It's no wonder. It's freaking hard. It hurts. It doesn't
Yeah.
feel good in your head and your heart.
Especially in a person to person kind of a business like coaching or consulting, it's as much about the personality and the cultural fit as it is about anything else. There is a client or a tribe for everyone.
Yeah.
It just takes a different process for different kinds of people to connect with different kinds of audiences.
That's right.
And so if I'm not aware, like if I'm paying attention to what calls me in from a marketing standpoint, what kind of posts do I like to read? How do I like to be talked to? Don't do the fear mongering thing with me and tell me that the world is coming to an end, because I already know that. Like
Yeah.
I get enough of that shit in my own head. I don't need your help.
Right.
But like, I also don't want a rah kind of a thing either. I want a nice, honest, authentic conversation, and that's really something that I think if you are a coach and you're listening to this podcast, if you're somebody who is in some sort of a person to person kind of a service industry game, you really need to dial it back and think like, who am I really servicing? Because you, first of all, it's not going to be everybody. It's
Nope.
just not. There is someone for everyone. And how can I really put myself forward to be the most authentic person I am? Not everybody at the party is going to be my friend. And if I think everyone at the party is going to be my friend, I'm either drunk or I'm a salesman.
Hmm. Aaron, I'm glad you brought this up. One of the things that I've had to work on as an Enneagram 7, I know you know what that means, I believe, or Enneagram 7, and
Familiar.
yeah, and as a lifelong salesperson, I'm always in sales. I love sales. Is learning that lesson, and I'm still learning it all the time, but one of the gifts that comes with age is you realize you don't have to be for everybody, and there's just it's like an abundance mindset versus a scarcity mindset when you're younger. And I look back, like, try so hard to have everybody like you all the time, and I'm just realizing it's almost an impossibility. And it's what I think as humans we're built that way. We shouldn't like everybody, because not even it's not a matter of liking it or disliking. Like, we may not vibe with somebody, and that's actually good, because that's telling us something. I relate this back to like dogs and cats. You go to the dog park, and we have the most friendly golden retriever on the planet who loves almost every single person and dog. And every now and again, there's just that person. She's like, I don't really care. I'm like, oh, there's something about that person that they don't vibe with. And animals do this all the time. And this idea in humans, like, we don't need to be everything for everybody. And we're
Right.
not going to be a good fit, both in our style, our approach. But to your point, there is likely enough business to go around. And I forget who said it, but I like the idea of what would you do, and this goes to any business owner, if you knew there was more customers than you can handle. They just don't know you yet. What would you do? I know what I would do differently. I don't relate to I don't go out and operate in that energy every day. I wish I had the stamina to do so, but what would you do if you knew that, let's just say you own a yoga studio, and you knew that you could fill up every one of your classes every single day if enough people just found out about you? What would you do? You'd probably do a lot of more things than you're doing today,
Hmm.
because the things you're not doing are based on you having feelings about it most of the time. Feelings, not enough energy, not enough time. Kids drive me crazy. I don't want to do it. Nobody's going to pay attention. And yes, these are all things that I think for myself too.
Yeah. Well, it's time and money are factors, and they are only factors to the extent that we allow them to be.
Mhm.
It's not like I'm going to try and tell somebody that they should spend $50,000 on a course if they don't have $50,000.
Some
At
people
the,
will.
I used to be one of those people, yes.
Yeah.
At the same time, if I never allow myself to imagine that I could spend $50,000 on a course, then I will never be able to.
Hmm.
And so for
Agreed.
me, I think the calculus for each of us is, where am I currently? I love graphs. Where am I currently on that graph?
Such a finance person. Erin, right now, for those who are just listening, she's creating a pie chart that we're no, she's not.
It's an XY axis, and
The Nexus axis, yeah.
I'm running the math. It's in Excel right now. But like, really, there is a calculation for that perfect amount of pushing and allowing, that perfect amount of of reality and fantasy, that perfect amount of working and resting. And it's the older I get, the more I realize it's never an all or nothing. As like at the beginning of this conversation, I don't remember if you said it off camera or on. I think it was before. You said yes and it's like, okay, great. So this circumstance is true and correct. Like this is the hand I'm sitting with at the poker table. Now what?
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
So we have pretty much killed almost an hour.
You
Um,
mean we've invested an hour?
I know I can say this with you.
Yeah.
Yes, we have invested an hour of
We've
our very.
slogged we've slogged through an hour. It's been awful, Aaron. Well,
With,
we're here.
I didn't make one Scorpio joke.
You did make a Scorpio joke. Aaron does not like Scorpio. Or Aaron has some serious feelings about Scorpios, and I am a de facto Scorpio.
I am as I
You love
am
your Scorpios.
getting older, I am realizing what amazing teachers they are in my life.
You love Scorpio. You love hate Scorpios.
There are some I really adore, and there are
Yeah,
others I could really do without.
yeah, yeah. I feel that.
You're a special kind of breed.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I think one of the things that I love about Scorpios is they're very passionate and they
Hmm.
know what they want.
Yeah, that is definitely me to a T. Actually, passion is is my first essence word.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was but when there's the audience, just give a little context. One of the things in the coach training program we went through together is you name your like five essence words, and my very first one for my very first coach was passion.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, I am a Scorpion. Or Scorpio. That makes a lot of sense. And I definitely know what I want most of the time. That's
Yeah.
true.
Really powerful. So, the way I normally wrap up our conversations is to ask if there's anything else you would like to circle back to, highlight,
Mm.
or a message that you would like to leave our listening or viewing audience with.
Yeah, to wrap up, I just to summarize a couple of things, and I guess this is advice, but do it even when you don't want to. And if you really don't want to, get support for why, whatever that means. I don't have a way you would do that. And if you're feeling like your life is small, and I think that's a good way to describe how I felt, that, and you don't want a small life, that is a great sign to try something different, even if it's something as simple as, and for me, it was like taking an improv class, like, oh, something as simple as that, like changed my life because that's where I met my first coach. I don't know if I ever told you this story, but to like try something different. And for those who are listening who are parents with children still at home, the kids take up all the time. I can tell you it's something my wife had to work through. My wife has a very busy job. I work a lot. We have two young children. You can always create that if you get the support you need from your significant other and enroll the kids. So I'm a lot of times that's something I hear. And the last thing I would say is congratulations to you, Aaron, on being out there in the world doing this work and having these conversations because these things make a difference. Yes, and I've seen you on a little bit of this journey. So for those who are here with us, who listen to us kill an hour, as you like to say it, continue to tune into Aaron because Aaron brings a lot of life experience, and I know you've gone through a tremendous amount of transformation, struggle, ups and downs in your life to get you to the point here where you get to have these conversations with people. So I just want to give you on a personal note, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. Knowing that you know where I've come from in the last 3 or 4 years, that means a lot.
Yeah.
It really
Well,
does.
I know, but you know way more than I do. And you're like, Aaron's like sitting there smiling. She's like, this is no small feat to have you putting this message out into the world. Because
Yeah.
starting a podcast is not as simple, is not just as easy as I want to start a podcast and getting a microphone and doing it. It includes all sorts of questions to answer, but also like, oh, what people are going to listen to me and they may like it or they may not like it. And I'll say this as a fellow podcaster, I never understood this because I was never really an artist of any type or a content creator. was, like work for other people or selling other things. And then when you put something out that's your own, it's like you probably have friends who are artists and they're like, yeah, it's like putting your baby out there. It's like having people comment on your baby. I'm like, oh, I get it now a little bit. People that write books or they do artwork or musicians where they're like, this is extremely personal. I'm like, oh, I kind of get that now. And I never knew that feeling until I started to do my own thing, specifically the podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for investing an hour of your amazing
Oh, look at that.
time
Look at the
and life.
reframe. She's listening. I love that. Yeah, no, thank you for inviting me. It's been an absolute pleasure. You're doing great work in the world and can't wait to continue to listen to all the conversations you have with your guests.
Absolutely. So, thank you for listening to another episode of The Secret of My Success, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for tuning in to The Secret of My Success, where we explore what it means to live a fulfilling life. Since you've made it to the end of the episode, I'm going to ask you to give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. I am your host, Erin Curran, again saying thank you so much for your support, and we'll see you next time.